success, wealth, recognition. Gary Cooper had it all, lost it all, then turned a revolutionary discovery into the success paradox. Here's Gary.
I'm back with Deborah Lee James, the 23rd Secretary of the Air Force. She's been sharing her inspiring journey from a small town in New Jersey to leading a force of 660,000 personnel with a $139 billion budget. We've also gotten into the power of mentorship, the importance of pivoting when faced with setbacks, and her framework for success in both personal and professional life. But now, Debbie, I want to geek out a bit. I'm not sure if you were like this, but as a little kid, I wanted to fly planes. What is it actually like working in that sandbox?
It was super interesting, very, very fun, very impactful work, going back to one of my principles about being involved with something that's way bigger than yourself.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was super. I will tell you, as a little girl, I never wanted to fly planes, but I wanted to fly in planes because I had the travel bug. So as Secretary of the Air Force, I got to fly in virtually every aircraft in our inventory.
What was the coolest?
I think the coolest was the U-2, which is a high aerial surveillance aircraft that flies so high. I can't tell you how high because I'd have to kill you because it's classified. It's classified. But I'll put it to you this way. It's at least twice the height of a civilian airliner. And when you are up there, you have to wear what looks like a space suit, like what the Apollo astronauts would, those real puffy looking suits.
Yeah.
And that's so that your blood won't boil at that altitude. And when you look up, you see the blackness of space. And when you look out, you see the curvature of the Earth. So that's how high up you are in the U-2.
Didn't we have one of those in the 60s that
we did.
Yeah, it looked kind of like the stealth bomber, but it wasn't the stealth bomber.
You're remembering, yes, the U-2 was a highly classified aircraft when it first came out. And there was a guy named Gary Powers back in the 60s.
I watched a documentary.
Down. Yeah, shot down over the then Soviet Union. So luckily, I wasn't flying in a U-2 that was that old. I think my
because
U-2,
it was regular jet engines, right?
Yeah,
it was kind of weird plane.
The basic
it's the predecessor to the stealth.
Exactly, and the plane that I was flying in was manufactured in the 80s, so that's old enough. At least it wasn't quite as old as the 1960s. But
when you were 4.
When I was 4, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
That's the coolest. What's the next coolest? Because we can go on for days.
I flew with the Thunderbirds, which is the aerial demonstration.
That's not fair.
Team. And it was a rehearsal for one of their shows that they put on. But I flew and experienced pulling G's, the G forces on the body. So once again, you have to wear a special suit.
Did you throw up?
All right. I knew you were going to ask me that. So I'm going to answer that question like this, Gary. If ever you get the opportunity to fly in an F-16, I recommend you take it. However, skip lunch. Okay. Enough said there. Enough said there. Yes.
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool. All the maneuvers that they do.
How about landing on an aircraft carrier? Did you get to do that?
I did get to do that.
That's
not the Air Force that flies those missions. It's the Navy. But in the 90s, actually, I got to do that when I was in government in the 90s. And that's the experience is like a controlled crash. It's a very, very hard landing and a very fast stop. Yeah. So that's many, many, many cool experiences.
So you felt like Top Gun in that environment.
Many times I felt like Top Gun, yes.
That's so crazy. What do you think was the biggest achievement that you got done while you were running this giant organization?
I hope the biggest achievement was in the people category, doing things for people to better the lives of the men and women who serve in uniform and civilians who were also in support of them in the military. And there were a number of categories of people that were particularly, I'll say, hurting or had morale issues when I became secretary. So one category of people were the people who were involved in the nuclear enterprise, which, we have nuclear weapons in this country, 3 legs of the triad, and the ICBM force, which is the land-based, the missiles out west, which God forbid we would ever have to launch them, but they're part of our deterrence strategy. The people who were involved with that mission had horrendous problems with morale, training, manning was down, the budget was way down. So here, this is a mission which is a no-fail mission, and yet we were under-resourcing it, and they felt like second and third and fourth class citizens within the Air Force. So there were a lot of initiatives to try to bring up morale, training, readiness. We launched a modernization program. So I hope I was able to leave a positive mark there. Another category of people which were suffering morale and retention problems and whatnot were what you would call the drone force. We call them remotely piloted aircraft. But most of America would refer to them as the drone force. So these are the people who are sitting in a kind of a cubicle-like area in an undisclosed location in the dark for hours and hours, and they are controlling these drones that are operating halfway across the world. And they're watching, and they're waiting, and they're recording movements and patterns of life so that when the time comes, a strike can occur. So once again, this, although they're not being shot at, they're not in danger of getting killed on a daily basis like some people who are, on the ground and in combat directly. This is a combat mentality, and the stresses that come with the job are real. The locations that they're based in are very remote. So there were, again, a variety of morale and pay and degree of being overworked because there weren't enough of them in those days.
I'm glad you brought that up. I remember watching a 60 Minutes episode, and there was one gentleman, and so he's in that bunker, he's doing that thing, and, he's in drone, and it may have shown a strike, it doesn't matter. But then he leaves and he goes out to a kid soccer game. It's a 60 Minutes episode. And I'm thinking, how does one deal with that psychologically?
It's hard. I asked that question. I did a lot of, personal interviews, and there have been studies done as well on this matter. It's actually easier, believe it or not, to be deployed, let's say to Afghanistan for 6 months or 9 months and be totally in that environment and have your head totally in that way of thinking and that way of living, that way of sleeping, that way of camaraderie with your unit people, than it is to go back and forth on a daily basis and be in a combat thought process in the dark and then go to a soccer game where you have to have maybe patience. Well, maybe you don't have any patience left in you. Maybe you snap at your child. Maybe you have a fight with your spouse. So it can be a very difficult psychological back and forth. And again, the locations that the families are living in that are engaged in this mission, it can be very, very remote. So the families can be unhappy too.
Yeah, the common theme I heard in both of those scenarios you gave, the nuclear and the drone thing, was loneliness.
I think that's a very good point. It's loneliness, and it's a foot in each of two very different worlds. In some cases, that can be very hard to bridge.
Another thing that, and this is jumping from one extreme to another, leadership can be very lonely. You're mentoring CEOs and C-suites now. Have you run into that as well? Because it's a far extreme from flying deadly missions as a drone operator. But when you're running a large organization, there's an extreme intensity in your brain, and you can't share that with just anybody. And then you leave and you go home, and you can't share that with your spouse or your children, and that intensity's in your brain. I know I dealt with that personally, and I know that the divorce rate in families with high stress jobs is high, depression is, alcohol and drug abuse is high. I don't know if you run into that with the people that you work with in these C-suites, but I bet it's similar to, on a totally different reason than people flying drones and working with nuclear stuff. But there is a parallel for different reasons. Have you seen that with CEOs and C-suites?
I absolutely have. And that is one of the values of always in your life, no matter who you are, is to have at least one person that you can really talk to. The value of a coach, the ethical responsibility of the coach is not to the company, it's to the individual. So there's where having a coach in that kind of an environment can have, it's somebody to talk to. It's not exactly like talking to your priest or your pastor, but it's somebody who ethically is not going to go back to the company, is not going to leak it to the Washington Post or to some other media outlet and make you embarrassed, because leadership is lonely and you are under a microscope at all times. All of your words and actions get parsed and they're viewed when you're on the job and even when you're off the job, because guess what? If you're the leader, a lot of people know what you look like, and there's cell phones everywhere and things can be taken out of context. So to have somebody to break that loneliness, and that somebody could be a mentor or a coach of some sort, it could be a best friend, it could be, but to have somebody to talk to is an important outlet, in my opinion.
I agree with you. If there were a takeaway for folks listening today, it'd probably be what you just said. To have someone you can be vulnerable with, that's trustworthy, that maybe have walked a mile in those shoes before. I thought vulnerability was a weakness, and it can be with the wrong person. But having someone like a coach, like you said, or even a peer group, whether that's, Vistage or YPO or something like that, where you meet routinely and you share what's going on in your work life. Would you add anything to that?
No, I think that is an important one. And I'll give you two other lessons learned in my life, because I have disobeyed these lessons and suffered for it. I've seen other people not live these lessons, and then I've lived them. So I know they work. So no matter what is happening in your life, I think it is important, as best as you can, to hang in there with positivity. So no matter how bad things feel at the present time, given your work environment or whatever, try to remember it could always be worse. Like we say in the military, hey, remember, nobody's shooting at you. You're not going to die today. You're going to live tomorrow, and things are going to get better. You have powers to change things. So try to hang in there with positivity, which is not easy to do during times of crisis. But the people who are able to see something positive are usually the ones who can see through the fog and figure out what's next. So positivity is important. And then the other one, and I know you're a big believer in this too, Gary, is leading a full life beyond work. I mean, our work is so important to us, but wow, if we don't have a family to love and to love us, or good friends, or church, or a hobby, or some outlet, hopefully multiple outlets beyond work, at the end of our lives, how will we feel about that? So
what's it all about?
What's it all about? So
Yeah.
leading that full life beyond work, even though it's hard to do the work-life balance thing, et cetera, you got to keep pushing for that. You got to keep striving for that, and make sure that you try as best you can to set yourself up on the job and in the home life with enough of a team. We always talk about a team at work. Well, you need a team at home too. You need somebody to help you with children or the various things of life, backup systems, just like you need a team and backup systems at work, because nobody can do everything perfectly all the time. Perfection is like the worst word, I think, because we all think we can do it, and yet none of us can do it.
That's one of the things you said in another interview, to be honest about your weaknesses. What do you mean by that?
It's self-awareness. So everybody has strengths, and everybody has areas where they're not so strong. and to be self-aware enough to know, hey, I am really good at this, but you know what? When it comes to this other stuff over here, I'm not nearly as strong as Gary or Bob or Lisa. So that's why I want Gary, Bob, and Lisa on my team, because together, boy, we can really get this done. So I'm a believer in know what your strengths are, know what your strengths are not, and then play to your strengths. The fact that I'm really good at certain things, wow, I'm going to play to those areas. And then I'm going to try to surround myself with people to bring me up in areas that I'm less strong, because guess what? I'll learn from that and end up stronger, but the team will be the strongest of all.
But you said something in that other interview that I thought was really, I'm just going to call it badass, because that's one of my favorite descriptions. Don't waste your time beating yourself up on stuff you're not good at. It's just a waste of time. So there was a study. We had a coach come in, and I can't remember how she kind of tricked us, right? She said, all right, if you're not good at something and you're good at something, what percentage of your time are you going to spend on what you're not good at, and what percentage of your time are you going to spend on what you're good at? And a lot of people put a lot of time on what they're not good at, and that was the wrong answer. Because why would you try to get better at what you're not good at rather than really focusing on the time that you're good at and maximizing that? And don't spend any time on what you're not good at.
Yeah, I agree. And you will become better at the things that you're not so good at if you surround yourself with people who know about that. You will learn, you will evolve. And it's, again, learn, evolve, reinvent. To take a short course in something, finance. I had never been trained in finance. I took a short course in it. So I'm not a finance person. I have a better appreciation for it, but I'm not going back to school for 5 years to learn finance, if you see what I mean. So it's a matter of degree, but I absolutely agree that not enough people realize that you need to play to your strengths.
You said in particular women, and I've seen that a lot because of this perfectionism issue.
That's right. I've seen it happen over and over again where I will be interviewing somebody for a position. I'll interview women and men, and there might be 5 key experiences that are prerequisites for the position or 5 key areas of knowledge. And the man will come in, 100% of the time just about and say, yeah, I can do this and this and this. And the woman will come in and say, well, I haven't had very much experience in this and this, but I'll work real hard because I'm a fast learner. They'll start immediately telling you what they can't do, but that they can overcome it and apologize, in effect, for not having focused enough in the past on it. I maintain that's the wrong approach. I think the male approach of focusing on what they can do is the way to go. And sometimes, with all due respect, I find men stretch it a little bit more than men.
So of course. Of course.
Y'all are legends in your own mind, Gary,
Hell
sometimes.
Yeah. We're told that from the time we're little boys. Don't cry, boy. Never show weakness. Never let them see you sweat. And that's dangerous for boys because then we think we're not supposed to fail at anything. So we treat the sexes different from the time they're born, and then they become strengths and weaknesses, right? So I'm glad you shared with the ladies listening. I have 2 older sisters and they raised me. So I feel like I have an emotional intelligence about ladies because I had 2 older sisters. So I want to help as many women as I can because I have an emotional bond to these 2 sisters. Getting back to some geeky stuff before we close, what threat do you see from, or challenges do you see specifically for the Air Force? I heard them talk this week at the RNC about possibly a dome over America like Israel has. Do we need anything like that? Is there anything from an Air Force standpoint? I know there's probably things you can't say or shouldn't say. Are there any threats that you see for America that we're not possibly ready for or we should be doing more for?
Well, my military training would cause me to say we can always be readier for everything than we are today, and certainly the key threats that have really been viewed on a bipartisan, basis. So even with changes of administration, the threats that I'm about to talk to you about have pretty much been the threats that we've been talking about for the last, I would say 8 to 10 years. So there certainly is China, which is now considered to be the pacing threat for the U.S. military, pacing in that we worry about it the most and we are specifically thinking through how to counter it. And the reason why China is the number one threat nowadays is because of its economic power and its growing military power.
It's
And
moving a lot around their part of the world.
right, they claim the entirety of the South China Sea as their own, which of course we can't let that happen because so much of the world's trade goes through the South China Sea. So they're kind of number one. Russia is right up there, maybe not number one, but man, they've got a hot war going on right now with Ukraine. They seize that territory. If they go any further and enter into a NATO country, we could be in an all-out war with them. And they have, even though they've really botched Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine was really kind of botched, I'll say. They learn from their mistakes too, and they're doing better, and they have space capabilities. They have a lot going for them.
And they have a willingness to just send human bodies into to their deaths to continue fighting.
Then there's Iran and North Korea, which certainly don't mean us well, both of which are either on the way or already have some degree of nuclear weapons. Keep in mind, nuclear weapons are horribly dangerous, but one thing that you also have to have in addition to the nuclear weapon itself is you have to have a delivery system that's capable of flying across oceans and so on to get to the United States. And that's a very difficult technological problem. So even if they have the weapon, they may not have the delivery system, not yet at least.
It's still a negotiating pain in the butt, and
Yep.
then they just use it as extortion for the next 50 years or more.
That's right. And then finally, there's terrorism. So, particularly Middle East, Africa, terrorism, maybe we think of it, Iraq, Afghanistan, that's where we were for 25 years or more. Well, to a degree, the ideology and so on, it's spread to Africa now. So that's kind of a hotbed of terrorist activity. And we've kind of put that on the back burner if it's not hitting us in the United States or hitting our allies directly or hitting our troops overseas, but it's out there. Every time we think we're done with it, something bad happens. So terrorism is still out there, albeit we're not working on it as heavily as we were, say, during my tenure, because it is faded somewhat into the background. So those are considered to be the major, I'll say, geographical threats. And then we have the threat of cyber, and we have the threats from space, and we have threats in these different so-called domains that could in some ways cripple us, hurt us, and it would be very difficult. It sometimes is very difficult to know where these threats are coming from. So, if someone renders our GPS constellation in orbit not workable, that would cripple the banking system. It would cripple our navigation systems in our cars. A lot depends on that GPS system.
I was going to ask you to switch gears now, to kind of close us out. In addition to not just our security, what are you optimistic about?
Well, first of all, I am optimistic despite all these threats about our security, because our secret weapon is our people. Our people think fast on their feet. They're trained to do so. They have the best training. And we could always be readier, but, we've also got the best equipment behind us. So I think we're still the best military in the world, and it would take a lot for a foreign power to take us on directly. So I'm optimistic about that. I'm optimistic that overall technology is going to leapfrog us ahead in ways that we can't even still quite imagine. But we have to be careful about that technology, because we know that there's also a dark side to it as well. And I'm talking here about artificial intelligence. I think it's going to provide way more good than bad, but it will provide bad as well. And so to have guardrails and safeguards is important there as well. I'm optimistic there. I'm optimistic about my grandchildren. I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I'm optimistic for their future because they have imagination and they have vision for their age, I'll say. And I can't wait to see what they do in their lives. And the children of that age, I'm just optimistic for that group.
Well, I can't think of a better way to end this than that. And just thank you so much for everything you've done for our country and for our listeners. And your book, Aim High, I think would be a fantastic thing for anybody to read. And is there anything else that I haven't asked you or you would like to say before we end the show?
Well, I just wanted to add that a fantastic second book to read is The Success Paradox by Gary Cooper. Your 3 principles are awfully persuasive as well. Be authentic, do good, and do well. So a lot to unpack there.
Well, thank you, and I hope you have a fantastic weekend, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you, Gary.
You're welcome. And that wraps up another episode of The Success Paradox. If you like the show, please take a moment to subscribe so you'll get notified when I release new episodes. Also, if you have a moment, I'd love it if you left us a review so that other incredible individuals like yourself can learn about the show. I'll see you next time.
To learn and practice the Success Paradox lifestyle, visit GaryCCooper.com. The Success Paradox is a production of Forbes Books.